Hello, edgelords and Easter bunnies. My name is TBSkine, and welcome back to what is apparently an ongoing series of animation analysis for the Kin of a Stained Blade animated short that Riot put out without even warning me that this damn thing was coming yesterday. And it's 10 minutes long, so it took a while. So just to recap where we are at so far, we have gone through pretty much just the intro of the thing, which is this minute and a half of incredibly impressive 2D animation. And I cut us off right around here, the moment when the short shifts into 3D, which is where it's going to be staying for the majority of its runtime. Now, the last video ended up being an hour and a half to analyze about a minute and 30 seconds of animation. That's because I have a special fondness for 2D animation. I can gush about that until the cows come home. With 3D animation, hopefully things will go a little bit faster and smoother, and also, I made the truly, in my own words, truly brilliant genius move of stuffing most of my discussion of the production into the first half. So the discussion about the multiple studios that worked on the thing, the discussion about like the individual roles of the people who tend to work on this kind of animation, all of that stuff is going to be in the previous video. So if you want to know more about that, go back and watch that one. For this one, hopefully we can get through, maybe not all of it, because you know how I am. Maybe this will have to be a three-parter, but hopefully we can get through most of it. So, let's just jump right in and get into it. Again, production details, who was involved in the creation of this anime, some discussion about some of the lore stuff, all of that is in the previous section of the video. What we're going to start a discussion with here, though, is the decision to mix media, to go with a 2D and 3D hybrid production, rather than like sticking entirely to one medium or the other. Because first of all, that's a massive creative risk, like especially when you set the bar with stuff like this absolutely hype, fantastic 2D anime aesthetic of this incredible fight scene between the two brothers. That's kind of a big deal, like, to start out on. And everybody gets super hyped for, oh my god, anime so far, yeah. And then, you know, once this stuff reaches the absolute climax of its tension, when we reach towards, like, the conclusion of the epic fight between the two brothers, it goes, oh, wait, hang on. No, this is a 3D animated short now. So, and that is dangerous, because if people are expecting and excited for a cool 2D animation, all of a sudden bait and switching them with a 3D animation can kind of kill the hype, like not just in terms of, oh, but I was so excited about the fight scene, but it can kill the hype in terms of, oh, I was so excited to see more cool 2D animation. So, how do you ease the transition into 3D? Well, there's a couple of ways you can do it, and the way that this short does it is that, first of all, we have the match cut, or not so much a match cut really, but we get the zoom in on Yasuo's brown eyes, and then we open with Yasuo opening his brown eyes again, which connects us, okay, same eye color, probably same character, so that we're not instantly confused and thinking, oh, hey, who's this lady? No, there's a scar on the nose, there's the brown eyes, we can tell it's Yasuo. And now here's how this bit of 3D animation reassures us that stuff is not going to look crappy now. Like, it's not going to be a massive downgrade in quality. There's still some cool stuff that's going to be happening. That right there is the moment that the animated short says, no, we can still do cool stuff. There's still going to be swords and shit. Don't worry about it. Because what it's doing here is it's replicating something that the 2D animated section also does, which we shall see in just a moment. There. It's replicating that particular effect. We talked about it extensively last time, that essentially what the 2D animator is doing here, or the animators, because it's always a team, are replicating the distortions of particular types of camera lenses. And I believe it's the focal length of the camera lens that determines like exactly how it interprets depth of space. And they're basically emulating a highly distorted version of that particular perspective by having the sword like practically poke out into the screen, doing the exact same thing here with Yone, the way he poses like with the sword into the screen, like these cool, dynamic, like deep field focus poses. Like, oh, yeah. The 3D section decides to open on exactly the same thing. And this, by the way, in 3D, you can achieve this, well, I won't say easier, because 3D animation, contrary to a lot of popular belief, is not actually the easy way out. It's not easier than 2D animation. It requires many of the same skills, but in a lot of ways, it has production optimizations that can take out a lot of the busy work and legwork that comes with animation production and smooth out some parts of the production. And for example, that's something they can do here, because you can emulate in software the kinds of camera effects that you would normally have to use physical lenses to get, without having to have an artist who's really well-versed in perspective distortion being able to draw this stuff. That being said, though, for a shot like this, I would actually also expect, you can kind of see it here, I would also expect that they're actually doing a straight up, a distortion of the thing itself. And you can see it here, that the sword is basically flexing into view. It's basically snapping into view like it's being bent out of its sheath. Like it goes going boing. And probably the way that the model is constructed this is a trick that they use in Overwatch animations as well, by the way, and generally 3D animation, something that you use a lot when you have a fixed camera angle, like a camera angle that you can control, that the player of a game or the viewer can't mess with. You can do some perspective distortion tricks. So I would wager that the model of the sword that Yasuo is currently holding in his hand here has a massively exaggerated size. Like, it starts off small and actually gets bigger as we get down nearer the end of the blade, in order to exaggerate that distortion perspective effect that we get here. Like I said, whether or not that's exactly what's happening can be kind of difficult to tell, because you can achieve this kind of effect with, like, in software emulation of camera distortions. But I would wager that the way they achieved this shot is to, like, literally have a version of Yasuo's sword where the end of the blade is massively oversized, in order to really get this extreme emphasis on the man pointing his sword. And then as we, like, swap into people just walking by and going, hey, what the hell is that weirdo doing? We go back to the normal size sword model. And there's also a bit of storytelling going on here. Something quite clever is that, like, Yasuo wakes up from this nightmare of the day that he killed his brother and draws his weapon, and we get this hyper-dramatic, like, "Whoa, sword, yeah, bah, cool, badass," like, danger shot. Like, this is a shot that emphasizes the danger of Yasuo's sword, but look at the shot that follows it immediately. Look at what Yasuo looks like in this shot instead. He doesn't look like a dangerous, powerful samurai battling a fearsome enemy. He looks like a drunk, crazy man sitting in the middle of the street surrounded by perfectly peaceful passersby. He looks small. He looks kind of pathetic, really. The way that he's framed between the passersby who are looking at him going like, what the hell is up with that guy? And with the sun-dappled light and him sitting in the shadow of this wall, like, he also looks trapped a little bit. Like, he looks almost like he's sitting in a cell, constrained in the middle of the frame. So there's this instant change of perspective that tells us how we're supposed to relate to Yasuo in this scene, which is emphasized, of course, by the sound design, where we get, like, the murmur of the crowd and people being shocked and kind of whispering. Like, nobody's scared of him, but everybody's kind of worried, like, oh god, is that guy okay? What a weirdo. And that instantly tells us how we're supposed to feel about Yasuo in this moment. Like, this is not... We're done with badass super samurai sword fights, and now we're seeing the consequences of that super samurai sword fight. We're seeing the emotional fallout in Yasuo after the things that he has done, and it's basically turned him into a weird, like, street drunk who murmurs and, like, swings a sword around because he gets angry at the things that he sees in his head. Like, that's the kind of attitude we're supposed to have towards Yasuo as a character, and that's kind of further emphasized. That's something that also, I think, the 3D animation does a good job of, because thematically, and I don't know if this is especially intentional, there's a point in making the past this badass, cool, hyper-stylized, dramatic anime samurai sword fight where every movement is massively impactful, where everything looks extra cool, but everything also looks a little bit more flat. Like, literally more flat, because it's 2D animation. Everything is kind of this sense almost of heightened reality a little bit. Versus, what's the feeling you get when you see 3D? All of a sudden, like, where the previous section, something we didn't really talk about, there's no lighting and shadows almost at all in this section of the short. Like, very occasionally, it will use actual light and shadow. For example, when lightning strikes here. A little bit of light and shadow. You can see there's some edge lighting going on. But other than that, most of the time, everything's completely flat shaded. Like, it's just... There's no shadows coming off of Yasuo's abs. There's nothing, like, the light behind him isn't casting a shadow on the side of his head. He's flat shaded. Like, just completely flat colors. And then we enter into the 3D reality, and all of a sudden, this isn't a flat version of Yasuo anymore. He has three-dimensionality, he has depth. There's much more complexity to his construction. He's not so stylized, he's not so idealized. Like, he's still idealized, let's be clear, like, especially, good lord, those abs. But he feels more real all of a sudden, where the dream world, the anime world, feels less physical, because it is flat characters, like, playing at and pretending to be three-dimensional. Here we have an actual three-dimensionality, and we also have a change in animation aesthetic, obviously. Like, still well planted within the tradition of 3D anime, like, as an aesthetic direction, but there's also a different aesthetic to the animation, because with 3D, stuff that you don't really do with anime, Yasuo doesn't breathe in this entire shot. Like, as he's standing there with the weapon raised, he doesn't breathe. His chest doesn't expand. His eyes don't twitch. There's no movement of his facial muscles. Like, and that's the thing with 2D animation, is like, you can't animate everything that happens in reality. In reality, humans almost never stand perfectly still. It's functionally impossible for us, because our hearts are beating, our lungs are going, our blood is pumping, our muscles are twitching and contracting. There's 1,000 million little electrical impulses and currents running through our nervous system. So humans are never quite still the way that they can be in animation. That changes in 3D, because in 3D, because the character is more real, there's also a necessity to emulate more closely that sense of reality in their movement. So look at Yasuo here. Even here, like when he's doing this, holding the sword out straight, like still fixated on the dream memory of what happened to his brother, he is not static. See? There's breathing. You can see his leg is twitching around a little bit. His arms aren't holding quite steady. His hand is trembling a little bit with the sword. He's not still in the same way. There's a more reality to him. There's breath. There's life to him. So that changes the aesthetic of the thing to make it feel more like reality, and also to make Yasuo less the idealized anime super swordsman and more of a person, like more someone who has emotional complexity and weaknesses, which is what the majority of this short is really about. It's about Yasuo's weaknesses, which are like unsubtly delivered to us here as he looks at his own reflection in a blade that's stained with blood. Like, he's literally looking at the consequences of his sins on the sword, with blood staining across his face like yet another scar that's been left by the battles that he has seen in his life. It's not a subtle visual metaphor at all, and it's one that's repeated multiple times throughout the thing. Which leads us on to the actual plot of the story, the things that actually happen. So now we get ourselves a new establishing shot. This is Wele. If you want to know the lore of what's happening in this thing, Necret already has an extensive breakdown. Dinka K has a fantastic reaction video as well, where she goes through a lot of what's going on there. I'm going to put links to those down in the description, and in the card up in the corner right now if you want to go check those out. They'll dive more into the lore and the backstory of what's happening here. But for our purposes here, we're getting a new establishing shot of the new reality. And this is where, again, we get to talk about mixed media, because yes, this is 3D animation, but it's not solely 3D animation. This basket right here, this wall, these trees, these rocks, this ground that they're walking on, it's all projected onto a 3D scene, in the sense that they have constructed a three-dimensional scene for the lighting to play against, that's being dynamically generated around the character models, but these are 2D illustrations. These are like 2D paintings, essentially, that the characters are being projected onto. And they're doing a very good job of it. This is a production technique that Riot uses for a lot of their animated shorts. Like the Tales of Runeterra shorts were pretty much exclusively made this way, with 3D character models interacting with environments that were largely 2D hand-painted, with like interspersions of 3D modeling in between there. But generally speaking, in the 3D world, when you see a background, it is going to be a matte painting, essentially. It's going to, or rather a series of matte paintings, because these hills right here are going to be painted on one layer closer to the camera in the 3D scene, whereas the trees and the hills in the background here are going to be painted on a layer that's further away. And you can see that in the way that, like, this hill closest to us scrolls up faster and moves quicker than the ones further away. That's just simple parallax scrolling to give a sense of depth, even though, like, we're just scrolling down a two-dimensional image, we get that sense of depth as though we're looking into an actual 3D space. And then we get in here, which is where I'd say that these awnings here might be 3D models, but the branches holding them up probably aren't, because I can see the awnings are rotating in space as we move around them. You can see how more of the top surface of this awning gets revealed as the camera pans upwards, but that's not the case for these roofs in the background. They don't turn in three-dimensional space, they just move up and down. But the awnings there in the foreground had to be 3D modeled because we had to have that little bit of twisting in space to sell the perspective, I think. I think that's what happened anyway. And then all of the character models that you see down here are probably, yeah, pretty much all of those are gonna be 3D models. Sometimes there will be a mix of 2D and 3D assets, where you will just, like, paint a painting of a person standing behind a stall and they'll be completely unmoving because they don't need to move. But here we actually have an absolute flurry of individual character movement that we won't spend a ton of time on it, I say lying, but we'll just take a little look at it, because, like, look at the old shopkeepers there, like, the dude in the background here. There's just a little bit of character animation on all of them, telling these little stories of, like, that guy in the background definitely trying to sell something, the one in the foreground having some kind of debate, maybe haggling over the price. Which, again, is what exemplifies a lot of what goes into this anime show, because, like, those characters didn't need to be, like, they didn't need to do shit. They just needed to be static characters that just stood there and filled out the scene, but instead, we get characters that actually seem to be alive, and seem to be actually, like, moving and behaving as people would be on a market day like this one, which is very extra, and I really appreciate it. I think this guy might just be a copy-paste of that guy over here. Yeah, they have exactly, it's recycled animations from character to character. You can see they do the same little wave, and you can see he actually clips through. He actually clips through the pillar here. Again, you will not notice this in motion because you're not looking at those characters, because you're not supposed to be. They're not important. Their movements are, yeah, essentially identical and copy pasted across the market, and I wouldn't be surprised if, like, a few more of those guys were... Oh yeah, look at that guy up there. I think he's doing exactly the same wave animation. Yeah, they're doing exactly the same animation. So you can see canned and recycled animations being used. But again, that's someone still had to animate that. Like, someone still had to create that animation cycle and then strategically place a bunch of characters in the scene, because you couldn't put two characters doing exactly the same movements right next to each other, because that would instantly give away the illusion. They have to be spaced out, which means you need a certain number of alternate animations to put on the characters, like, for example, these walking animations, where we have... Ooh, interesting. Characters, like, walking, they have to walk at slightly different rhythms. Like, look at the lady up here and the person following close behind them. They're walking on just slightly different rhythms. They're not all walking in step with each other. They're not walking with exactly the same speed and rhythm. Because, again, if you do that, the human eye can actually pick up on those tiny little details and see that, oh, hang on, these people seem to be marching in step with each other. That's weird. So again, the animator has to take care to make sure that the people are moving, and you're recycling animations, obviously, but you have to do it in such a way that they don't look completely identical. Because I think, actually, yeah, I think this guy right here is exactly the same character model as that guy right here. And I think they're doing exactly the same walking animation, and I think they're even moving on the same timing. Yeah, more or less. Those two are, like, more or less identical. But if you put them right next to each other so that they're walking lockstep next to one another, that's the kind of thing that you might be able to see without doing this crazy kind of obsessive zooming in that I'm doing. And just the sheer number of character models, like, they've got character models all the way out to here, which, again, if we just reset the... You can't see that! And yet someone, like, constructed this three-dimensional scene and put some moving character models out there that actually have a little bit of movement. Not a lot, but a little bit of movement. Because, let's just be extra, we've got the budget, we can do whatever the hell we want, apparently, which I think is kind of amazing. Moving on, that was just an establishing shot. Again, it's just an establishing shot to tell us, like, we are in Wele, the same place that we saw Yone appear at after the Spirit Blossom short when he beat the Asakana in the Spirit Realm. And there's obviously a huge market full of people. There's some kind of big event going on. That's really, if you read the lore, you know that it's the Spirit Blossom Festival because the Spirit Blossoms are here and something Noxian invasion, blah, blah, blah. But for the purposes of understanding the narrative of the short, all you need to know is, oh, it's a market day. It's a festival thing of some kind. And the rest you can kind of understand by inference as Yasuo starts to talk to the old man and the old man says, oh, are you also here to commune with the dead? Basically, and Yasuo's like, well, I would, but I got here late and I can't get up to the tree in time, so I don't know, he's just gonna put it off. And then the old man is like, but I have a secret spirit temple that you can use to talk to your dead brother. That's not suspicious, follow me! Which is what we shall see in just a moment. And the framing of the old man is interesting because, like, spoiler alert, he's a demon. Evil demon trying to basically suck Yasuo dry of negative emotions in order to empower himself. He's a bad guy. But we don't know that yet. And why don't we know that yet? So when we cut to the shot, we have two main characters in the shot. And the way that we know that they're the two main characters is because of the way that they're framed. Yasuo here is like, he's obviously different from everybody else. Like, everybody else is walking around in these dignified white robes, and he looks like something that got puked out by, like, an anime fan on PCP. Okay, that's not fair. I actually like Yasuo's character design, but relative to the other characters in the scene, he has that anime protagonist syndrome that makes him stand out like a Yu-Gi-Oh! Protagonist in a crowd of normal people, right? And then we have the old man, who's, again, an odd differentiated shape from everything. Like, nothing else has this weird giant turtle shell-like hat on it. So the two main characters of the shot become immediately obvious the moment we cut to it. Thank you. Which again is part of the quality of filmmaking on display here, is that when you do a cut from one thing to another, ideally the audience shouldn't spend the first 5 seconds of looking at that cut, which might be all that they get, figuring out, oh, hang on, where are we, what's going on, what's happening to anything or anyone. We should be able to read it pretty much instantly, and you can, because Yasuo's is pretty much the only really visible face in the shot, and the old man is just such an unusual shape that, oh, yeah. So you see Yasuo coming, going, you see the old man picking up his bag, and then you see Yasuo accidentally knocking him over. So this is where the animation quality, I won't say it dips, because it's still very high quality 3D animation, but like any given shot in the 3D section of this thing, like any given shot of characters doing anything and moving, has much less impact and is much less stylized, and in that sense, much less impressive than like the hyper-stylized anime sword fight bullshit that we got up to here. Like in this section of the animated short, every movement essentially has maximum impact. We talked about that, like the build-up and release of tension that is happening all the time in this section with the characters moving around. Like even in the dialogue section, everything seems to be framed and seems to be moving for maximum dynamic impact on everything that actually happens in the thing. That's an aesthetic that changes once we get into 3D. Partly because the same production constraints don't apply, and partly because that doesn't really work as well in 3D. Like, you can do it, but it doesn't really work as well. It doesn't take advantage of the medium in 3D. In 3D, instead, what we have is a more, again, I won't say naturalistic, because it's not. Like, nobody who looks like Yasuo moves around naturally. Like, that's just not how it works. But you have a much greater sense, again, of reality, of three-dimensionality, of weight to the way that the characters move, a greater sense of reality to them. Even though they are so hyper-stylized as they are, like, practically the old man's wrinkles are drawn onto his character model rather than being rendered. But you have this greater sense of reality, so when Yasuo walks by the old man and bumps into him, where in the animated short, like, that would have, like, well, I mean, in the anime section, if you were to animate something like that, it would probably look a lot cooler and more stylized, but here, it just becomes this casual little blump. It feels much more boring, and that's not a criticism, because this is supposed to be a mundane market day where nothing of any kind of note or interest actually happens. It's supposed to look more boring and mundane, and eventually, as we get into, like, the stylized anime bullshit sword fight scene, that's when we see that impactfulness and that aesthetic of build-up and release of tension very much come back into the way that things work. But for the moment, because we have a completely different mood during the peaceful, calm market day conversation scenes, everything just kind of takes everything down a notch. Just everything calms down a little bit, things get mundane and kind of boring. And we get characters that move with a different sense of weight. Like, look how Yasuo bumps into the old man here. Right? Like, it's not even... Yasuo isn't even really jostled by it. He just kind of... Oh! Because the old man is so tiny and frail that Yasuo bumps into him, and he barely, like, even registers the hit, whereas the old man gets knocked completely off his balance. Like, there's this completely different sense of weight and dimensionality to the thing, to the proceedings, which is one of the advantages of doing the mixed media thing, is when you have a boring-ass conversation scene like the market here. And again, I say boring visually in the sense that this is not high entertainment, it's just stuff happening that's advancing the plot, but not boring as in unengaging. You can get a much better feeling of that particular sense of ordinariness with three-dimensional animation. Anyway, that was a lot of rambling about something that shouldn't have taken this long to talk about. Let's look at the backgrounds here for a second, because again... Ooh, I believe we've seen this animation before. Let's zoom in on this guy. Hello, Mr. Man, waving your arm back there. Recognize that animation? That's the canned animation from those vendors that we saw in the previous establishing shot. That one's being used here again. And I would wager that most of the characters that are moving around in the backgrounds here are using some of the same recycled animations. I think this lady right here, yeah, you see how she turns her head left and right as she walks? That's a recycled animation that I saw in the previous crowd shot. So lots of canned animations being used here to create this sense of dynamism and movement in the market. But it works. Like, it does do that. It does create a sense of dynamism and animation in the market, even though they didn't need to. Like, they genuinely didn't need to. Especially since, like, the focus of the scene, and this is where we can talk a little bit about framing and centering. So, Yasuo... They start out completely separate in the frame, right? The old man here, Yasuo is over here, separate in the frame. Then they collide. Boom. Oh, I'm sorry, Ofa. And then they bend down. Now notice where they're placed in the frame. They are completely center frame here. They're like, even though the old man here is like very much at the left of the frame, the bump moves him over to the center. Yasuo kneels down. We cut to another center shot where they're completely centered in the frame. Another shot where the old man is centered in the frame. And then as they rise... You can actually see with the little marker that I've got in the center of the screen here, Yasuo grabs the old man's arm and pulls him up. And where is that pull? As we cut to the next shot, right near the center of the room. So everything here is centered, which helps keep us, keep focused on the action as we cut to these different sequences. Because imagine if we cut from everything happening in the center of the action to this shot, where they're, for whatever reason, the composition has put them all the way out on the left. You'd be like, oh, hang on, are we supposed to look at the marker still? What's going on? Oh, there they are. You'd have this moment of confusion, but then, and again, this is very basic film language. Like, film students who are in the audience right now are rolling their eyes going, yeah, obviously. Like, yeah, not really telling me anything I don't know there, buddy, but that's part of the basic good filmmaking that's going on here, is that someone who's working on this understands how to do a shot composition, how to do a cut that keeps, and again, right in the center of the frame, that keeps the audience's attention where it needs to be, without causing confusion. And now here we get into some of my favorite stuff about good 3D animation. Look at how the old man's face animates. So there's the obvious thing, his mouth, right? Like, his mouth moves because he's talking. Makes sense. That's usually how talking works. But now take a look at... I'm probably going to zoom in here just to make it a little easier to... Yeah, that's a face that's going to haunt you. So now take a look at the wrinkles to the left and right of his nose. Look how they move around and deform as he speaks. Look at the subtle little thing that they're doing with his eyes, where the eyes aren't really keeping the same shape. You can see here that he's got them a little bit more narrowed. You can see the pupil is just gently moving left to right a little bit, which is what pupils do when we talk in real life. They don't stand still. You can see that his nostrils here flare a little bit as he's getting ready to speak some words. So there's this full animation of the whole entire face, not just the bits that are doing the motion of the talking, but stuff that doesn't need to be doing very much or moving, like the eyes opening up a little bit, the eyeballs darting back and forth a little bit, the eyelids closing down a little as he smiles. And again, that's some of that, like, it depends on the rigging. When a character model is rigged, there is a specialized production assistant, typically, called the rigger. That's rigger, and I don't want to see any stupid comments about that. Whose job it is basically not just to model the 3D model, which is sometimes also part of their job, but to create, like, to basically tell the computer that's doing the animating, this is this bit on the face right here, the top of the eyelid. Well, let's add on a control point to that, so the animator can pull on it and make the face move. Let's add a control bit on these little wrinkles so that they can move up and down. Let's add individual control points all around the lips so that we can have the old man both open and close his mouth, but also form it into circle shapes for O sounds and make T sounds and, like, pull the lips back when he needs to say an E. Let's have control points on the jaws. Let's have control points around the edges of the nostrils so they can do that. And that's all, like, that's the job of typically the job of a specialized person whose job it is to know what does the animator need to be able to do in order to execute the scene that we want him to animate. Like, what tools do they need to have in their toolbox in order to create a good character animation for the purposes of the short that we're making. And that's a difficult discipline because, like, you can add too many control points. Like, you can do too much. You can have too many control points for a given scene, which can actually make it harder to animate the character because you move one bit of the character and then 6 other bits of the character don't move the way that you expect them to because the control points are all rigged up to different things. It's a complicated discipline, is what I'm saying. And it's a difficult interplay between the animator, the rigger, and the animation director to figure out what does each model need to be able to do. And so typically over the course of a production, like, the character model that we got of the old man here for this particular close-up of his face, which is, of course, not quite so close-up in real life, this might be a different character model than this one, which might be a different character model than this one, because you can swap character models out from shot to shot depending on what does the model need to be able to do in a given circumstance. I don't think they've done that particular thing in this instance. I think they're using the same model from shot to shot, but that's a thing that sometimes in some productions you can do. And obviously, as we get into, like, the old man turning into a demon, obviously there's a transformation of the model that goes on, but even there, like, the model that we have here of the old man absorbing Yasuo's grief and growing bigger might not be quite the same model as the one that Yone actually starts slashing around with in this bit right here. Like, this bit right here, when the old man character is jumping around and doing these action shots, that might be a different model than the one that, like, grasps him on his back and sucks the energy out of him, because this model right here has a transformation function. It needs to be able to transform from normal old man into slightly more demonic old man with the hands and the model deforming out, like bulging up and stuff like that, which demands different control points than being able to jump around and do action animation. So that's a lot of, again, that hidden work that I talk about, that, like, the stuff that you don't see typically in animation productions, because the animators work really hard to make sure that you can't see it happening, that they're swapping models around, that they do different riggings in order to have character models that are capable of doing different things. And that's the same thing with Yasuo. Like, here, when he's in his samurai outfit walking around in the market square, that might be a different rig, or indeed a completely different character model than the one that he's got here when he's bathing in the spring, which might be a different character model than the one he's got when he's here, like, drinking this poisoned ghost juice or whatever the hell that is, which might be a different model than the one he's using when he actually has the fight scene and does all these action shots. Because the rigging requirements for those things can be, they aren't always, but they can be different enough that you need to actually make completely different models for each thing. I said at the start of this video that I put all the production talk in the previous version of the video. I was clearly lying, because we've gone about 30 seconds and it's taken us about half an hour. Why am I like this? Anyway, let's speed things along a little bit. I think we've talked enough about that now. So let's transition to this section right here. And here's where we get to talk about color and lighting a lot. Because, boy, isn't this pretty. Like, boy, is this not very, very pretty. Indeed it is. Like, the scenes in the market are fine. Like, there's lots of nice colors. We have this orange glow, nostalgia, golden hour, late in the day kind of feeling. like with lots of light bloom coming off the edges of everything because it's like the sun is so directly on. That all looks nice and fine, but it also looks pretty mundane. Like, it's not, visually it's not that interesting. It's pretty, but it's not that interesting. So we move on to the temple, and all of a sudden, oh, this is very interesting, isn't it? And note a couple of color choices, which are common to Ionia, but which aren't really very common in real life. Purple, for example. Purple is a very rare color in real life. There aren't a lot of flowers that are colored purple. There aren't a lot of animals that are colored purple, because it's a difficult part of the electromagnetic spectrum to reproduce in nature. So when you see it in movies, this is why a lot of sci-fi will use pink, purple, and like that particular like really deep, powerful shade of blue to exemplify other worlds, like to exemplify alien or magical worlds. Look, for example, at the Avatar movie, like the James Cameron movie from a few years ago that earned $1 billion for no goddamn reason, and for which we're getting like 4 more sequels over the next 10 years. Good Lord, help us all. That one for the world of Pandora. Lots of greens, because of course it's a nature world, but also just purple, blue, and purple, and blue, and purple, and blue, and purple, and blue, all over the place. That's not a natural nature color, really. It's a color that we instinctively read as a little bit more magical, a little bit more, mystical and mysterious. Because first of all, we know from our experiences of living in the world that those colors don't occur in nature very often. And second of all, because pop culture has reinforced that connection. So from the first shot that we get here, where everything is blue and purple, we've got a little bit of grays going on, like some very slight browns, perhaps, with a little bit of gold and all the fireflies. That color profile is so completely alien and different to the one that we see in the market, which looks like it's much more naturalistic lighting. We've got the sun low in the sky, we've got lots of orange and gray and brown. Then we get to this, and it's like, oh, magic world! Like, we instantly get the sense that we've transitioned into some strange and mystical space, not the least of which because the frickin' water is glowing. Water isn't supposed to do that. Water is not supposed to glow. Why is that happening? Well, because magic. Which does 2 things. Like, in terms of the narrative, first of all, it draws suspicion, I think, away from the old man, because we should not know that he's a demon until it is absolutely necessary to know. That also comes across in the character performance, by the way. Like, everything about this old man's character performance says old, wise, sensei character. Like, trustworthy, friendly old man with wisdom who's something, magic spirit, whatever. And you can see that especially in this little gesture right here, like that gentle little old man gesture, where he, like, reaches out with a hand and this, like, little spirit blossom petal that looks like a cherry blossom flutters out of the sky, and he points like gently towards the river and says, cleanse yourself of doubt and fear and immerse yourself, and like that. And that's also part of what the mysticality of the setting is selling, because like compare and contrast, if you just took him to like what looked like a normal ass house in the normal ass woods, and you'd be like, you've just followed like a weird old man out of the town into a normal-ass house in the normal-ass woods. That's creepy, that's scary, but now, no, we've followed the wise old sensei into the mystical realms of magic. That's fine, that's perfectly normal. So from a narrative perspective, it also does a little bit of that misdirection that we need in order not to be suspicious of the old man before it's necessary. And by the way, a little bit of storytelling trope here. They are passing through a doorway. Like, they're literally passing through a portal into another world as they enter this particular scene, which is a lovely little bit of storytelling. And the arch also serves the visual purpose of making it possible for us, as the shot cuts to here. Where are they in the frame? Oh, hey, there's a frame down there. Oh, there they are. They are framed in the frame, which makes it easier to find for the eye as they enter the scene. And I really like Yasuo's weight as he walks along here. Like, look at the way that he's striding across these stones. He's not, like, walking gingerly. You can see, like, it's almost like he's carrying a little bit of weight on his shoulders everywhere he goes. He has this, like, heavy stride with these long steps that he's taking, which makes sense for the old man, because he's literally carrying a heavy backpack that's part of his character model. But with Yasuo, he looks a little bit weighted down, even in the way that he walks. Like, there's this sense of heaviness to his gait, even as he moves, which I really like, because it gives you that, first of all, it gives you that sense that Yasuo is important, like that he's an important person. He doesn't step lightly through the world. He has an assertiveness about him. But from a storytelling perspective, that also makes sense, because he's carrying a lot of guilt with him this stupid anime cool husband boyfriend guy. I really like the subtlety of this animation. Like, there's so many little things happen. Okay, let's zoom in on him. So there's a lot of little things happening here as Yasuo does looks at the flower and turns around to kind of mock the old man a little bit, like to be sarcastic. So look what happens when he turns around. Like, he's about to rotate his torso around to look at the old man, but look what happens with his legs when he does that. See how the foot slides across the stone as, like, the hip rotates, and that, like, pushes the foot backwards, and at the same time, he raises up just a little bit more on the toes of the leg at the back, and then he pivots around the pivot point of that foot. And that's all just to turn the character around a little bit, and that's not even mentioning the stuff that's happening with, like, you can see how the shoulder is rotating around his axis as the knee is moving as well, which helps bring Yasuo's face out from behind the shoulder guard that he's got going on. And you can see him settling into this new position. You can see it takes him a while even to settle down into a new comfortable position because he's doing this whole move thing. And then they've got the physics simulation on the ropes. I think this is physics simulation. I don't think they did that by hand. I think they had a physics engine look at the way that the rope is moving and told them it's heaviest at the ends here. Please generate like a believable set of motion tweens for how the rope should be moving. But even when you use, by the way, even when you use physics engines to simulate the movement of physics objects in 3D animation like this, the animator still needs to take a cleanup pass on it. Like, the animator still needs to check, okay, is this thing clipping into something that it shouldn't be? Is some weird X factor in the math of how the physics object is being treated? Does that generate some weird flailing effect that we don't want? There still needs to be a human touch looking at and calculating, like, and making artistic decisions about how to present that physics simulation, which is something that annoys me sometimes, especially like people like Andy Serkis. Some people look at stuff like performance capture or motion capture and say, oh, well, that's like clearly no animator worked on this because they did motion capture for the whole game. Something like the Uncharted series, which is famous, like Naughty Dog are famous for doing a lot of performance capture and innovating a lot of performance capture for their games. And like, yeah, performance capture is a thing that they do to provide a baseline, but animators still have to do a crap ton of work over the top of those performance captures to clean them up, like to compensate for times when the computer isn't tracking every single little dot on the character correctly, to sometimes smooth out little imperfections that happen in actual real-life human movement that just don't translate well to character models in a video game. There's still a huge artistic process that goes into things like physics simulation, like performance capture. Animators who know what the hell they're doing still have to be in charge of that stuff, because otherwise you end up with stuff that looks bad or uncanny. And that's true even for simple stuff like ropes hanging from a character's belt, swinging around a little bit as he moves his weight around. Someone needs to check them and make sure that the physics simulation is doing what it's supposed to do, because if they don't, then you end up with these weird edge cases where something just doesn't look right in a weird, indescribable way, and the audience can tell, and, well, weirdos like me can tell, and a lot of people will just get the sense that, hang on, that didn't look quite right. Anyway, that was a lot of discussion of Yasuo turning around on his hips while he's sitting down at a river, so let's move on to the next shots. Man, it's pretty. Okay, so little tiny thing there. Little tiny thing here. Look how when the leaves land, the petals rather land on the water. Reasonably sure, I can't be 100% sure, but I'm reasonably sure they hand animated those little rings in the water. I think those are actually hand animated and then layered on top of the physics simulation of the water as it's rushing past. Oh, yeah. Those are definitely hand animated, because, like, one of the rings just vanishes here. Oh, that's lovely. Little things like that I love. And the same thing with the ripples over there. Anyway, here's the thirst trap. Here's Yasuo, just getting everybody wet and horny. Unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on your perspective, he's also doing some character animation. So let's take a closer look at that, because there's also some storytelling going on here. And again, probably this is a completely different model, probably using some of the same 3D assets, but it's probably a different model than the one that normally walks around wearing clothes, because clearly part of the point of this particular shot is to emphasize Yasuo's... Like, this is a thirst bait shot. They know what they're doing. This is intentional. Don't be fooled. They know what they're doing, and they know exactly how they want you to feel about it. Like, with the lighting coming up from the water on the lower abs and the shading, like, yeah, they know what they're doing. So that's probably a different character model. Which probably has a slightly different rigging than the other character model that we've been using so far. I would not be surprised if it turns out that this model doesn't have legs. I wouldn't be surprised if all they gave him, like, below the waistline that's in the water is just like this gray amorphous blob that doesn't need to be seen, so that they don't ever have to actually animate his legs. So take a look at the aesthetic of his movement here. Because here, something interesting is happening. Because, like, again, in the actual shot that we're looking at, we're zoomed out pretty far from Yasuo himself and what he's doing. But take a look at how his character moves here. Especially take a look at how the chest moves, or more specifically, how it doesn't. You kind of get this little bit of an Action Man feeling from the way that his arms move here, right? Like, as though the shoulder isn't actually doing any movement. It is a little bit, but most of the actual movement is being handled by only the arm itself, and that's an artifact at least of the rigging, the way that the model is stitched together, but it's also an artifact of how they wanted this scene to be. They wanted a very still, very unmoving shot of Yasuo generally, so what they're doing here is they're practically only animating his arms. Like, they're barely doing anything. You can see the torso, like, it turns and twists a little bit, but it stays very steady. And that, again, I think is because, well, they know what they're doing. They wanted the torso to have this lighting applied to it. They didn't want it to move around too much. Because I think, actually... Ooh, I'm right about that, actually. So that's why. I get it now. Okay, I think I know why they keep the torso so still. I don't think that's dynamic lighting. I don't think that lighting right there, I think they painted that light directly onto the character model. I think if you took this model away from the water and put it anywhere else, it would still have these bright white edge lights and these dark shadows on the pecs and on the underside of the abs. And that's why they can't move it around too much. That's why he can't twist and turn too much, because if he does, then the light source would switch its relationship with the rest of the character model, and it would look wrong, so he has to stand really, really still. And you can see that if you look at the way that the light behaves around this side of his shoulder here. See how even though he's moving and rotating his arm around, even though he's messing with the blade, even though he's changing his shoulder, the lighting just stays, like, painted onto his abs almost, so that's why he's so still in this shot. I wasn't sure before. I thought it was dynamic lighting, but no, that's why he has to stand so still. Also, because it's horny. Like, he needs to stand so still because you need plenty of time to take in the magnificence of his abs and be thirsty about it. But that... oh, I love that. This is some of my favorite stuff. You can't see it, but I'm kind of bouncing up and down right now. This is some of my favorite stuff. Is looking at the workarounds, looking at the little cheats, looking at how they just, like, kind of... How we want this particular effect, but we don't want to program an entire dynamic lighting system to keep the lighting on the underside of his abs exactly the way we want. So we just paint the lighting directly onto the character model and just don't have him move around too much, and it's fine. Oh, that's good. That's really funny. I love that. I love that. I love the problem solving. That's so clever. That's a clever way to do it. Oh, that's good. Anyway, the story point that they're making here, and here I believe they have switched to a different character model. I think this model is not the same as that one, because I can see the edge lighting isn't painted onto it anymore. Or maybe they just swapped the textures. So here we get the storytelling that the blood is being washed off of Yasuo's blade, like the stain of his sins is being washed off the blade, which might be the first time that he's done that in quite a while. Even bothering to clean his sword of the debris of the violent lifestyle that he's chosen for himself. Which is a very cool moment, and again, this is something that comes up later, that, like, there's a point being made about the whole thing, clean sword, bloody sword, as we transition back into yet another 2D animation section. Now, we've talked about most of the 2D stuff already, most of the things that are quite impressive about it, but you can see that on display here again, that here we're animating on 2s, consistently on 2s, I believe. Yeah. Which is... the frame rate that you'll typically, well, I say frame rate as a shorthand, but this is the style of, like, the timing and style of animation that you'll typically see in a cinematic Disney movie. Like, they typically animate things on 2s, sometimes on 3s, and that's why this looks so smooth the way it does, which again is the kind of thing you'd never see that in like a weekly schedule anime TV production. You'd never get a shot like this one, and I think there's something so clever going on here. Because we have this, like, Yone is dragging Yasuo away from a fight that he's been in, right? And you can see this, like, Yasuo, we have this rhythm of Yasuo pulls back, Yone pulls him forward, Yasuo pulls back, Yone pulls him forward. Look how they achieve that in this particular shot. They have Yone, like, the front of Yone head just massively exaggerates into the frame. Like, you get this stretching effect almost as he stretches into the frame, pulls Yasuo along, and then Yasuo pulls him back. And then you get this boing, 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 almost elastic band effect where Yone, like, stretches himself forward and then gets pulled back. And you can even see that happening on the arm a little bit, like that there is this odd rubber banding effect where it's almost like the muscles shift around along the length of his arm to fit what they need it to be doing for the particular shot that they're showing. And that's a really dynamic way. This is what I talked about, like how... Go away, free promotion email. This is what I talked about how... in the 2D animation, unlike the 3D animation in the market, even like relatively mundane scenes like a brother pulling along his stupid younger brother who wants to fight all the time get invested with a much greater sense of dynamism and energy than they would have if they were animated in 3D. In 3D, you could still do something like this extreme pulling into the camera thing that Yone is doing here. You could still do that, but it would, like... I think it would be harder to pull off, like it would be more work in some ways, and it would be kind of a weird thing to do. I don't think it would look as natural and believable as it does when you're dealing with 2D flat illustrations that can kind of get away with stylizing their way around reality a little bit more. And again, like the thing that I emphasized the last time, when the characters talk, they actually talk, like their mouths actually form the words that they're saying. Like, you can kind of... You can't quite read their lips, but you can see that you don't have anything to prove, is what Yasuo is saying here. So you can see that... thing to prove. You can see him forming that little O, prove. And you can see the T sound coming out as, like, he does this to prove, right? Which is just impressive. Like, it's impressive to have that level of lip sync. I really like it. It's very well animated. And I love the fire aesthetic on Yasuo's hair. Also because contrast, in terms of character design, contrast Yasuo's character design with Yone. Look at their hair. Yone has this hairstyle that's all bound up and tied down. Like this very proper prim dealt with. And then Yasuo has this hair that's functionally just like a flame coming out of his head all the time. His head is always on fire. And you can just see the contrast between them in that little detail about how they manage their hair. That Yasuo is this fiery-headed wild little brat who's like always moving around and like things are always shifting and messing around with him. While Yone is like, he's tied up. He's tight, uptight. Quite literally up tight. That's just good character design. Anyway, moving on to the scene with the unnaturally smooth walk cycle that we talked about previously in the last video. Again, some lovely character animation going on. Nothing we haven't talked about already. One thing I want to note in terms of character design again, they have such long necks. Like, what the... Who has necks? The swan neck Yone over here with the... it's like 12 miles long. And this is a stylization choice, by the way. Like, it's a stylization choice to make him look taller and leaner and like make him look more authoritative. And it's the same thing with Yasuo. It makes them look sleeker and a little bit more dangerous to have these very unnaturally long necks, which again is the kind of thing that's harder to get away with if you did it on the 3D model of the character, because I think it would look more unnatural. But because they're 2D animated, it's just a stylization. Like, you can get away with more stuff in 2D than you can in 3D because it has less of that sense of reality. It feels less real, and therefore the eye doesn't judge it as harshly. And by the way, posture. So Yone, as he walks away, has this completely rigid up and down straight posture on his whole thing. Look how Yasuo stands. Like, he's got this his head perpetually bent a little bit forward. He's always got this slightly more impatient, slightly more punk-like vibe to him. A little bit, where Yone is always, like, upright and uptight. Yasuo has this swagger to him, this sway going on, that again, just in the way that they carry themselves physically tells some of the story about how they relate to each other as characters. And you can also see that in their combat poses. We'll talk about that once we actually get to the fight scene, if we ever do. Anyway, back to 3D World. And I like Yasuo's hands here. Like, it's an interesting choice that they've gone with this. It's almost Gorillaz-like, in terms, like the band Gorillaz. It kind of has a little bit of that stubby, knuckly style to it. I really like this version of Yasuo's hands because they aren't little dainty anime hands. These are hands that have clearly seen some use, some work. These hands have done some shit to people. And they've held a sword for a long time. They've punched people in the face. They've scrabbled against the dirt. These are hands that have seen a long and difficult life. Rather than what you could often do, especially in 3D animation, like with 3D anime, you get these character models that look pretty, but kind of bloodless. Like, they don't really look like they're real people. And they're not supposed to either, by the way. But I like this. Like, that, those are hands that have seen some life. Those are hands that have done things. Which, again, in terms of character design, is important for Yasuo. He's a man who has been places, done and seen things, and, like, it's left a scar on him. And by the way, this is when we first get suspicious of the old man. Like, if you're anything like me, this shot right here is the moment that you realize, oh, no, wait, hang on, this is weird, actually. Why? I'm not sure I can trust this guy. So why is that? Why is it that this shot right here gives us that sense of, is there something up with that guy? Like, you're not sure yet, but this is the first instant of like, not so sure. And there's two reasons why that happens. First of all, because he appears over Yasuo's shoulder. He's behind him, he's out of focus, like, which makes it feel like he's kind of sneaking up on him. He's also, his body language has changed just a little bit. Not much, from when we see him in the market here. Not much, but, like, look here. Here, his head is above his shoulders, like, very clearly. He's not standing up straight because he's got the heavy backpack on, but he's, like, mostly has this, like, neutral, relaxed position to his body, right? Looks calm, looks relaxed, looks kind of friendly, really. But then once we get to, if Premiere Pro can keep up with my scrolling, once we get to here, his head has sunk down a little bit. Like, he's holding his shoulders up a little bit more around his head, and he's got this slightly more hunched over position. And you know what that position is? That's a predatorial position. That's the position that like a cat takes when it's about to pounce on its prey. Like, the head down, shoulders up, and there's tension in that body language. Not a lot. Like, it's not you instantly know this guy's bad news, but it's like, something's a little weird about him all of a sudden. It's because those shoulders are up. It's because he's appearing over Yasuo's shoulders, because he's kind of sneaking up on him a little bit. It's because he's in shadow. Like, he's literally in shadow a little bit from his hat, but also Yasuo is lit up by the glow of the magic flower thing, while the old man is much more shaded. So even though, like, his demeanor hasn't changed much, like, he's still smiling, he's still looking friendly enough, it's that little bit of tension in his body that just makes him look like, it's a little wrong. And now you also start to see it in his actual face, in his facial expressions. So take a look at this is a relatively neutral facial position. Take a look how it shifts. As, like, Yasuo says, drink usually just causes me trouble. Look how the eyebrows shift a little bit, how he does that little blink. And all of a sudden, there's that a little bit more of a slyness to him, right? There's just a little bit of a change in expression and mood. A little more sly, a little more rather than, haha, I am wise sensei. It's a little more, I'm gonna figure out how to get you to drink this stuff. Like, it's a little bit more sinister, just a little. It's not much, but here you see it. Like, here, like, especially when you zoom in on them so you can really see it. Maybe that's a little much zoom. Here you see, like, that shiftiness, like, where you can see he's really got his head let down really low right now, and the shoulders are up, and he's offering this thing, and he's got this crooked smile on his face, and you can see the eyes really narrowing down. He looks really pleased with himself, like he's about to get away with something. That's what he looks like. And that's when the viewer starts to get the sense that, maybe, yeah, like, that's not a trustworthy man's face at all! Don't do that! No! Yasuo, why? How can you not see it? And that's a good question. Why doesn't Yasuo see the demon? And here again, look at his pose. Like, he's just given the man some tea, right? Like, if he was trustworthy, he'd just given him some tea. You would expect him to be relaxed about it. He'd be like, oh, here, have some tea, and then I'll go back to do whatever the hell I'm doing, because it's just tea. It's not important. It doesn't do anything. But this is a look of anticipation. The hands are up. You can see the tension of like, ooh, will it work? Will it work? Will it work? Will he do it? You can see him waiting for something to happen. You can see him anticipating it with glee. And as Yasuo drinks it all down, you can see, he did it. You can see that, they can see the hands relax their tension a little bit, because like, it worked. He drank it. The fool. And this is when Yasuo, you can see he gets that moment of suspicion, and then the drink kicks in. Oh boy, does it kick in. It kicks in a lot. And he drops the flower, and here's where we get a little bit more. Oh, yeah. Look at that, look at that. So most of the lighting, a lot of the lighting effects of the flower as it explodes here, as the illusion of the spirit blossom fades away, that's all it is. It's an illusion. This stuff right here, the smoke and the flames, that's 2D hand animated. You can see that because it moves on 2s rather than moving on 1s like everything else. So that's 2D animated, which is lovely. And then we get this lovely effect. You can see action literally happening inside Yasuo's eyes. And I'm reasonably convinced what they're doing inside Yasuo's pupils here is they're actually playing back the fight scene between him and Yone in the rain. Like, I think they're playing back some actual footage, and then they've just blurred it out and, like, kind of added some effects to it. I think that's actually what's happening in there. And again, we talked about this in the last episode, but like really, really slow shots like this one, where things are like falling in super slow motion, and things are really moving deliberately and slowly, are really difficult. They're really hard. Oi, hiccups at the worst possible time. They're really hard to animate because you can't cheat. Like, there's no cheating at this point. When things move this slowly, you have to animate them correctly. You have to know the weight, you have to know the gravity and the density, you have to know exactly how something would fall if it was only under the influence of gravity at this extremely low speed. So those are just difficult, and they're showing off when they do that. And now it's just mask off for the old man. And I like the way that, like, the hands that slide over Yasuo. He doesn't grab him. He slides his hands over the shoulder, like a creepy old man at work, like, who keeps insisting on giving you massages even though you tell him to stop doing it. And then you can see he digs into him. And you can really see, like, the thing of, like, he's drinking Yasuo's sorrow and pain out of him. And again, this character model right here, the one that's able to transform and grow and like, oh, look at that, like, blah, blah, blah. How he kind of swells up unevenly. That's probably a completely different character model than the one we get when he's actually in the fight scene with Yone. Oh, that swelling is just nasty. Look, I love the way they recontextualize his eyebrows, because when he's a friendly old man, his eyebrows are all like they're hanging practically by the side of his face. This gives him this little puppy dog eyes almost, like hanging by the side of his face, completely harmless. And then once he's in demon mode, look how they change. They become these like jagged things that like just point straight up onto his forehead, like really giving him that hellish demonic. Ugh. And I like the realization shot. I like that he's draining Yasuo and sucking energy out of him and just eating his guilt for dinner. And then he notices, he's like, oh, wait, hang on, what? And then here comes an ass kicking. And that, by the way, is Yone's, is it his E? I think it is. Like, Yone has an ability where he can project his spirit body out into the world and run around and hit people with it. And then eventually, after a short time, it's forced to return to his main body. And that's why Yone here is all red and glowing. That's because he's doing astral projection, basically. And props to the VFX artist. Are those hand animated? No, they can't be. Surely not. I actually can't tell. I can't tell if these swirls and flows are hand animated or not. Some of it is definitely generated as 3D models, but like the wind coming forward here, I would say is probably hand animated, while this is probably 3D generated. But that's hand animated, and a lot of the sparks flying off are probably hand animated. That little white curve there is hand animated. This is a really complex set of effects. Yeah, this, like the white curve, this blue curve, and these red sparks, that's all hand animated on top of a 3D shot with a lot of lighting effects going on. And I like this is a chaotic shot, like, because this happens that fast in real time. But when you slow it down, what you see is, even though it's a very fast shot, even though you barely get to see anything that happens, they still do dynamic lighting on the old man's character model to make sure that he's being lit up by the power that Yone is sending at him. Which I like. And oh, the ragdolling. Oh, that's good. Look at that. Okay, so look at Yasuo's arm here, and the other arm when that flaps forward into frame. You see that? You see how it almost turns into spaghetti a little bit? I think what they do here is they break the model just a little bit. You can see it here especially. I think they break the model just a little bit to make it a little bit more floppy than it really could be. Like bones and sinew and tendons and blood probably wouldn't let a body actually move like that, but they're letting him flop around a little bit extra to really sell that, like, disempowered collapse to the ground. And I believe... Oh my god, did you really? Okay. So, okay. This smoke in the background might be 3D generated. It might be. I think it is. But that dust cloud that Yone is kicking up down here, I think that's hand animated. I think it is. Like, the flames on his sword absolutely are not. Those are definitely 3D generated, but I think they actually animated this little kick up of dust on ones, even in the background as Yone is floating towards the old man. And by the way, love the animation of the old man's character model, that, like, they do this little stumble. As you can see, he recovers his balance after being pushed back. Slides backwards, and you can see, like, oh, he kind of has to step a foot backward in order to catch himself and regain his balance as Yone does this death hover coming towards him. And then we see Yasuo sort of regaining some of his senses a little bit. Just enough to, like, in time, notice what's happening behind him, see an old man being threatened by what looks pretty much like to be a demon of some kind, glowing red, fire effects coming out of it and everything. And see something cool that happens here. As Yone, the sword that he's about to swing, as he's about to swing it, you can literally see that they grow it. They make it just a little bit bigger, and then they add this smear effect to it, so you can see the arc of the sword coming down. And you can just barely see Yasuo, like, running into frame, so that when we get this shot of the clash, and again, all of that, like, all of that light there, like, that stuff, that's hand animated, I believe. Yep, definitely. And then with lighting effects added in the 3D engine over top of that. And by contrast, the old man here, the demon, rather, look at his animation. Very stiff, right? Like, he's practically standing completely stock still here. Like, I don't think he's actually moving much except to raise his chin a little bit. And then he just, like, kind of, Very simple, very kind of stilted, not very smooth animation, not like the rest of the animation that's happening, because it doesn't need to be. All we need from the demon old man guy here is that he takes a bracing position, he defends himself, because Yasuo comes in and becomes the focus of the shot instead, immediately. And again, dynamic lighting effects being used on Yasuo to really sell the power of the impact. And let's see. Are they hand animated? No. Surely those are just... I think... Oh, maybe they are 2D drawings that are being expanded dynamically in 3D. I'm not sure, actually. Very interesting. All the flame and all the lighting stuff coming out of Yone is definitely 3D generated, though. While this smoke here... Yeah, again, the smoke I'm not sure of, because a lot of it looks 2D painted, but that could be generated in 3D models nowadays, I believe. Yeah, like, because those wind streamers there, they have to be 3D animated. They have to be. Like, they wouldn't... The reason I'm confused is because they've been so fucking extra throughout the entirety of this production otherwise. Why wouldn't they be so fucking extra as to hand animate this shit? Like, I don't think they do. I think those are 3D generated wind streamers that are following Yone, along with some 3D generated lighting effects as his spirit body recedes. And notice the difference in the camera work as well, by the way. The camera behaves very differently right now than it did for most of the 3D sections so far. You see how much the camera isn't moving in any of these shots? Like, it's not even tracking anything as the old man walks away and Yasuo walks into shot. Like, we get his abs face first. The camera is completely stock still. Like, we get this tracking shot down over Wele and then a tracking shot up. Well, not a tracking shot, but like a shot that's panning upwards. Or... Is that what's called panning upwards? Film terminology, not my strong suit. But other than that, the camera is practically static. Like, we get these little bits of camera movement, but it's practically static. It doesn't swing around, except like when it really needs to follow the old man's gesture and the pedals. The camera barely does anything for the vast majority of the 3D section. Even when we get to the bit of the old man like poisoning Yasuo, we get these completely steady shots, holding still and waiting. And it's not until we get to Yasuo grasping his neck that we get a sudden zoom out to emphasize the power of the action. But mostly the camera is like very placid. It doesn't really move around a lot. It doesn't do a lot of stuff until we get into the actual action scene. And then the camera starts to swing into action. You can see it happening here as the sword comes down on the demon. It zooms in. You see that? Until Yasuo basically stops it. And we get these quick cuts, and then as the demon recedes, now the camera is in action. Now the camera is moving around. Steady shot to establish Yasuo standing around saying, "Show yourself." And then we get this dramatic zoom in on Yone himself. With... Are they hand animated? I want to know. Yep, that's hand animated, alright. I'm not here for you. And now the camera is just all up in the action. Like, it tracks Yone's whatever the hell that is, wind technique or whatever. Yone knows wind techniques, by the way. That's something you should... Like, he doesn't know as many wind techniques as Yasuo. He's not as good at them. He doesn't know all the secrets of the wind techniques, but he was trained at the wind technique dojo along with Yasuo. So he knows basic wind techniques, even if he doesn't know, like, stuff like Yasuo's ultimate, for example. He can't do that. But now the camera is active. Now it swings around. Now you can see it tracks Yasuo and pans... It like, rotates up to meet him. Then as he's thrown into the air, it tracks him, swings around underneath him, behind him, as he tumbles across the ground. Lovely bit of ragdoll animation there, by the way. And you can see, again, even on a steady shot like this one, you can see that it's like, it's moving a little bit. And that's the Michael Bay thing. Like, one of the things that people tend to forget about Michael Bay, because he's such a singularly terrible filmmaker in so many ways, is that one of the things Michael Bay genuinely did innovate and did fantastically well, especially during his early career, is this dynamic camera movement stuff, which you see in a lot of movies nowadays. He's one of the pioneers of that. Like, he is one of the people who who pioneered a lot of that stuff as visual style. And also other filmmakers, it's never as simple as just one dude doing anything. But that's something that's something I'm willing to credit him with. That he has actually influenced a lot of action direction, just with his super high maximum impact animation style. And here's something that must be satisfying to everybody who's ever had their promotion series ruined by a Yasuo main. Seeing him get absolutely wrecked. Spoing! So, rolling, tumbling animations like this one are difficult. They're difficult for a number of reasons, because you need to have this chaotic sense of loss of control, but like it still needs to look like it's an actual body, like it's an actual thing that works physically, that's tumbling over. You can't just turn him into spaghetti and have him roll across the ground. You do have to maintain some anatomical consistency. And also, he should not be impaled on his own blade. So there's a lot of careful management of exactly what the limbs are doing, what the momentum of the body is doing. And this is not physically realistic at all. Like, the way that Yasuo tumbles here is not physically realistic even a little bit. Because you can see, like, he lands on his back, rolls over, then his head collides with the ground, basically, makes him tumble end over end. And then as he comes down, you can see he comes down essentially sideways, rolls over along his own axis. And here you can see, again, they're doing the spaghetti thing. They're breaking the model a little bit in doing something that, like, a human body should absolutely not be able to do that. But they're doing it just for a moment, just to really sell the rotation. And here you can see it goes wrong a little bit, because here it's fine, like he's moving fast across the ground, doesn't matter. Now the camera comes to a stop, though, and Yasuo is not supposed to go through the rock in the background, so he just kind of rolls in place a little bit. Just kind of rolls in place and doesn't move along the ground quite correctly. Until he finally comes to a rest. And he kind of looks like he's gliding across the ground unnaturally a little bit right there. And that's a small animation mistake. Like, again, in motion, you don't notice it, and it doesn't matter. Because, like, you don't see that there's that little uncomfortable gliding effect happening that maybe shouldn't have. So it's not an animation mistake as such. It's a thing that you only see if you frame by frame through things like a weirdo like I do. And here we get to Yone's fight animation, and God, he's so cool! Like, he's anime bullshit swordsman, but he's so cool. And here again, notice the breaking of the character model. Like, a human arm is not, even a demon human arm is not supposed to be able to do that. That's not how bones work. But it doesn't matter, because it's all in the service of, this is squash and stretching. Like, this is classic Disney principles of animation, actually, where you break the character model and smear things out and make things like be off model for a second, just to sell the direction and the movement and the power of the motion that the character is going through. And you can see even they're doing manual animation smearing on the sword, basically smearing it out and adding this, like, follow-through effect. And you can see again here, they're breaking the character model. Look how completely twisted Yone's character model gets when he gets into this turn. And again, remember what we talked about with anime aesthetic, with the build-up and release of tension? That's on display here brilliantly, because he does this quick spin, and then see how all of a sudden he kind of lingers in the air a little bit, and then he finds his feet. And here, classic squash and stretch, they stretch out Yone's leg longer than it actually is, like rubber, so it can reach the ground, then the rest of him follows down, and the leg kicks out, and he does this superhero landing thing. And here, they're hyper-distorting the space, like, look how big, like, Yone's sword is not that long, but look what they do to it when they swing it under the old man's feet. They just hyper-distort it completely into the space to get this super dynamic sword arc that just, like, really looks badass. By the way, that arc of light there, that's hand-animated, baby! And you can see the stretching happening with the old man as well. See how, like, his arms get stretched out as he's about to do this backflip and land on his feet? That's all over this thing. You see, like, these little breakings of the character model, these little cheats going on that you can't see in motion. But when you slow them down, you realize just how much and how hard. That's the thing about 3D animation. 3D animation can often look really kind of static and boring compared to 2D animation, because 3D animators a lot of the time don't want to break the character model. Like, they don't want to deform it, they don't want to mess around with it, and that comes back again to the discussion of animation rigging that we were talking about. The rigger who constructs the control points and, like, defines the ways in which a model can move is also the man, or woman for that matter, or non-binary person responsible for making sure that character models can be broken this way, that they can make these completely unnatural movements for the purposes of selling an impact, that the animator has that ability in their toolbox without having to, like, fight the model in order to get it to do what they want. And what you get with a lot of cheaper 3D animation productions is that they never ever do that. Like, they just never ever break a character model. They never want to do it because that's a lot of extra rigging work, and that's adds a lot of trouble to the production that they might not want to deal with. Now, here is where I get resentful of motion blur. Like, the motion blur works because it sells the power and speed of Yasuo's motion here, but it also means it's really fucking hard to see what he's doing, which annoys me. But one thing I want to point out about this, him drawing the sword and doing the tornado, look at his arm over here. Look how, again, we do this kind of breaking of the character model a little bit, where this arm kind of trails behind him. Almost like it's being pulled like a ribbon around the rotation of his torso, which again helps sell like the power of the spin that he's doing as he sends out the tornado to smack Yone in the face. And the tornado, at least, I believe, is... yeah, that's a 3D object. That's a 3D object enhanced with some 2D effects, I think, but it's a 3D object. Thank God. If they hand-animated that, I would scream. Nice. And again, look at the use of smearing. Like, we have all this fucking motion blur, which I resent it. I don't like it. But look what the motion blur is doing. Like, all the blurring, all the smearing that's happening on Yone helps sell the movement that he's about to make. Like this, like you can see how he sweeps the swords back, and again, breaking the character model in this like snake-like motion, zoom, and then whum! Swoops in to collide with his brother once more. And the camera, again, just because we're doing the Michael Bay thing, decides to swing around them while they're fighting. And I resent motion blur so much, because, like, this looks cool in motion. This looks absolutely fucking amazing in motion. But when you slow it down and you look at it piece by piece, it just looks like a blurry mess. Which, like, petition to make animators stop using motion blur 2020. They won't, because it looks good, but I want to see what's happening, though! But again, you can see extreme breaking of Yone's character model. Like, the way that he swoops, he has this arc that goes down here. He swoops down here, and then instantly rotates. And you can see how his arm, again, doing that trailing thing behind him in a way that's just not quite physically possible, which delivers these kinds of completely badass motions as he counters. Like, Yasuo comes in with a sword swing from below, and he counters it by clashing down his own sword from above. Oh, it's so cool. It looks so cool. And again, just don't care about elbows. Doesn't matter. Elbows are irrelevant. Only sword fight is relevant. Slashy, slashy! And you can also kind of see that, like, Yone isn't really attacking Yasuo here. He's like, hey, brother, do you want to do, like, a jump? Because I'm about to do this really obvious, like, low sweep that you can see coming from a million miles away. And the grace, like, he moves like a snake. He moves like a dancer. Like, the way that he spins and rotates around his axis. And again, no elbows. Don't care about them. Don't need them. And you can even see that they're even bending the sword. Like, they're just deforming it a little bit to swoop around his body like a streamer. And some hand animation on the trail of the eye. Just to make that look cool. And again, look at his arm. Oh, this is some JoJo posing right there. That's not supposed to be happening. And yet, and you can even see it in the torso, actually. Look how, like, when he raises his arms up, how his whole torso is just, like, completely stretched out to really sell that he's raising the swords high above his head and he's about to bring them down. Like, kapow. And more flash frames, hand animated as well, with some 3D effects applied on top. Oh, it's very good. And again, ooh, here's some cool effects. Again, the model that they use to transform the little old man demon into the fully grown Asakana demon that he eventually becomes, probably a different character model, like probably a model that's specifically designed to be able to do that transitioning. But one thing I wanted to point your attention to, look at what they're doing with the texture of the model. Like, as the old man is absorbing more and more torment from Yasuo, look at the scribbles that they've got going on, like that ripple across his skin, and really helps sell this idea that something unnatural is happening beneath the skin, that he's swelling up, that like this unbelievable tension happening inside him. And again, motion blur, stop it! Oh my god, did you... I think that water splash is hand animated. I think it might be. It could be. It could be a 3D effect also. It's hard to tell sometimes. Nice. Again, like, that's not a natural position for a hand. Like, what's his elbow even doing? Just his ow, God, I'm trying to do that with my own body right now, and that hurts. You shouldn't do that. Don't ever do that, kids. Don't try that at home. Yone bringing the swords up. And here, there's an intentional stillness being enforced. Like, Yone practically, like, glides into view here, like an avenging spirit. And then he stops, and then he does the raising the swords thing. But notice, again, like Yasuo in the water, but for a different reason. Like, only the arms really do a lot of motion here. Everything else just stays, like, almost completely stock still. And that's to sell this feeling. Like that snap, like he's snapping the swords into position and he's ready to kill. And that because you have this stillness and then this sudden snapping motion, but it's completely in control. Like, he doesn't wobble, he doesn't have to refocus his balance, he doesn't have to refine his center. He just snaps into position, like ready to for the kill. So, like, they keep the rest of the body completely still during this thing. Another reason to keep him still, so that they can do the match. The little flash to his 2D animated version. So, bit of lore. The reason why Yasuo hasn't seen the demon until now, like, even though, like, this, we have this 12 tons of evil practically standing over him, even though the old man looked like this horrifying little, like, even though the old man looked like that and Yasuo saw it, why didn't Yasuo go, oh hell, that's a demon, I had better fight that thing instead of the swords dude who's fighting the demon for me? Why doesn't Yasuo see it? Well, because you have to think about what the demon is. What does the demon represent? What is the feeling, the emotion that it's feeding on? What is it inside Yasuo that powers that thing? And that's his, like, well, I'm not 100% sure exactly which feeling it is, but it's his guilt, it's his self-hatred, it's his fear. Like, it preys on those emotions, it represents those emotions. The reason why Yasuo doesn't see the demon is because he doesn't want to. Like, he doesn't want, it's things that he's been avoiding confronting for his entire life, basically. Things that he's been running away from. Which is why we get this scene here. I'm no murderer. Then why are you running? Right? You're not a murderer, Yasuo. You didn't kill Elder Soma. So, Yone asks, why are you running? Which is the moment when Yasuo realizes, okay, it's time to actually confront this thing. And the fade, like the fade from 2D to 3D is so well executed, because it's slow. They could have cut, like they could have done another, like a bright flash of light and then cut from one to the other. So I think the way they did it, I think the way that they managed to do it is first they animated the whole sequence in 3D. Like they had the 3D animators do this, and then the 2D animators got that, and they rotoscoped over the top of it, which is to say that they took the frames of movement from the video file, and then they just drew over the top of it to make sure that the eyebrows and the eyes, which are the main thing here, are completely, perfectly lined up, like completely perfectly lined up for almost the entire transition, and then they fade out. Because like the eyebrows, the nose and the eyes and the eyebrows are the three most important features of this transition. Those are the three things that we're paying attention to. Those are the three things that we like that need to be perfect, otherwise this doesn't work. And they fucking nailed that. Again, that's just more a matter of putting in a lot of work than technical accomplishment necessarily, but it's very good. I like that. It's very well done. And now that he realizes, like, I'm not running anymore, he turns around and quite literally confronts the demon that's been on his back for most of his life. And now we finally get some cool-ass demon fight animation. And again, lots of breaking of the character model is probably going on here somewhere underneath all the motion blur. But we get this build-up and release of tension, which I talked about extensively in the last video. Build-up of tension, where, like, he's just kind of hovering in the air, basically, for a while, and then all of a sudden, whoa! Snaps into motion, like, raw! And that's the anime motion aesthetic. Like, that's the thing that anime is so fond of doing. That makes anime look like anime, which is also what we get here. Like, a build-up of dramatic tension. This slow, like, with a reaction shot from Yone being proud of his brother. You can see him smiling a little bit. Finally, you're doing, like, you're going back to the path, brother. And then release of tension. And, oh, Yone following up with another cool-ass little sword flourish. As you can see, the sword... they're actually... cool. Okay, so Yone flourishes his blades, and they only actually get to here, but that's not dramatic enough. It needs to look cooler. So the animator just goes, oh, well, what if we bent the blades unnaturally? We just... And again, they're doing the thing where, in order for this to look cooler, they're exaggerating the size of the sword blades a little bit into the frame so that we get this really cool, like, dynamic shot of Yone getting ready to pounce. And then slice. And this is just like Sonic and Shadow the Hedgehog. Red and blue.
I'm done running. Can you feel life moving through your...
Oh, it's pretty. And by the way, notice the emotion contrast in the way that Yasuo and Yone's fight animation is animated as well. Where Yasuo has this one strike, this one stroke. Poof. He comes through and steps into, like, the cool samurai pose where, like, he's finished the sword slash. Yone, on the other hand, has this completely different movement aesthetic to him, where rather than stopping into, like, a steady pose, Yone does a little ballet thing. He does a little pirouette. Whoo! I'm spinning around. And once again, the little stretchy leg trick to get him landing. With the flourishes. Which again is from a character animation perspective, is just a good way to differentiate the two. As the demon absorbs, like, as much misery as it possibly can. Oh, it's pretty. It's just really pretty. At this point, I think I've said everything that needs to be said. But again, build up and release of tension. Yasuo is functionally hovering in the air, building up the tension, building it up. Demon, oh god, oh shit. As he does wind wall. I guess the demon doesn't know that wind wall doesn't cause any damage, but fair enough. I don't think it's wind wall. I think it's an actual slash. But unfortunately, he doesn't get a clean landing because Yone basically cuts his arm open. Like, you can see this blood, even though the character model doesn't get injured, but there is this little splash of purple demon blood that comes out as he denies the demon that safe landing that it was looking for. And then, again, build up and release of tension. The demon is functionally hovering in the air as Yone builds up his power, and then snap. Tension releases in a flash. And I love the rotation. Like, that, again, with Yone's aesthetic always being rotational. Like, he's always spinning around. He's always, like, twirling around himself. So he twirls into the air with all these streaming circular effects following him. And then the demon, following up on that, twirls itself as well in the air as Yasuo comes in for the Hasaki. Or whatever the hell it is he says when he uses his ult on the tank and fails to do any damage, and then he dies and goes 21-0 and starts flaming your mom for whatever reason. And there's a couple of cool movement things going on here. Yasuo hits the demon, right? And the demon basically snaps into another position, and then Yasuo does this little ghost fade thing over to the other side, and the demon functionally, like, gets snapped. Like, there's no smooth transition from one pose to the other. He gets snapped into a different position and snapped into a different position. You can literally see him teleporting here. over and over again with every hit. And then the final one. And again, build up and release of tension. The final hit, Yasuo appears floating in the air, building up tension, and then snap! Release the tension. It's just a feast for the eyes. And we haven't even talked about colors. Oh, well, we have. We've talked about colors extensively. But look at those colors! Look at that shit. Like, look at that shit. Look at that shit right there. Look at those colors, man. Blue, red, golden, yellow. All of it against this purplish background with, like, this purple mist of blood basically pouring out from the demon itself. And again, build up and release of tension. We're slowly building tension, building tension, building tension, building tension. And then snap. Poof. Bye-bye, demon pants. So, a little bit of more color stuff. Yone is identified with red and black. Those are his major colors. He's also got a little bit of the blue going on from like his wind magic side, but mostly he's red and black. And that identifies him as an outsider, a stranger in this environment, because the whole environment, as we talked about, is purples and blues and like magic hues, lots of grays, a little bit of brownish hanging out around the edges, but mostly that. Yone stands out as a contrast from that in a way that Yasuo doesn't. Yasuo, let's see if we can find a good shot of it. Yasuo is much more of a natural fit with this environment. You see, like, his colors match the environment a lot more. He's also identified mostly with blue. He's got some black, a little bit of gold on him. Whereas Yone looks like a foreign thing here. The demon even the demon looks like a more natural denizen of the environment, but Yone always looks like a bit of an outsider here. And he's supposed to be this spirit hunter, Asakana thing from another world, and that's why his colors are like this bright red that makes him stand out, that contrasts him with the environment. This is very well done and very well. So, by the way, I think I can't be sure. Okay, so fire effects definitely 3D generated. All the particle effects, all that like particle stuff that's flying out, that's 3D generated. The lightning, though, I think that's 3D generated. I think those lightning effects are 3D generated. I think. But a lot of it is 2D. Like, all the flash frames here, all of those streamers, all of that stuff, that's 2D animated. Like, someone had to sit down and paint those things frame by frame over the top of all this 3D animation bullshit. Which is a tremendously impressive amount of work to go into it. Click. And the evil is defeated. And again, the camera, since we're out of combat mode now, no more battles, the camera calms down a lot. Now, it still has much more dynamic angles than it did in the start of the thing. Like, again, in the start of the 3D section, we have these like very steady angles straight on from the side, like center on characters, mostly looking at them from like eye height or from above. And here, we get these dynamic angles, like looking at Yone from below with this Dutch angle thing going on. And again, here, like looking up at Yone from below, which is a position I'm sure a lot of people would like to be in right now, which is where he's dominant in the frame. Like, it makes him powerful, it makes him in control in the frame, because this is where he pronounces his judgment on Yasuo. You may deserve death, but not by my hand. This is the moment he pronounces his sentence on Yasuo, basically, which is, I sentence you to keep living, brother. Which, again, just perfectly good filmmaking, frankly. And at this point, I think I have run out. I think I've run out of things to say. I think we've covered most of it. I think we have. It's very good. I really like it. And again, notice the shift in color. We go from the domain of magic, the spirit realm almost that we're in, where the demon lived, like the spirit realm of Ionia, essentially, to this transition to, oh, all of a sudden the colors are very different. There's not really that, like, bluish purple hue left. We got these scarlet, magenta, pink, a little bit of reddish, a little bit of orangish things going on. There's this shift in color palette as we exit the demon's domain, as Yasuo walks away and Yone stays where he is. And those changes in color, like that change in setting, is just so beautiful and good. Anyway, let's spend half an hour talking about the animation on the League of Legends logo. No, but we'll follow this thing through. and watch the last bit. Again, there's not much to talk about in terms of the animation here. It all looks very pretty, but very little really happens. It's more of a dialogue scene, which I appreciate, but we do get a bit of follow-up on something that was set up earlier. Specifically, Yasuo and the reflection in the blade. The blade is clean now. It's not stained by his sins any longer. He has made peace with his brother. He has confronted his guilt and his fear, so his feeling is different. The blade means something different to him now. And the moon, the bright light of the moon is reflected in it. As well as his own clean face. Like, he has cleansed himself of his past, he's ready to move on to a new phase of his personal journey, specifically one that takes him to Bilgewater, of all places. I wonder if there's some kind of event of some sort that's supposed to take place in Bilgewater soon-ish. Maybe, I don't know, the harrowing is happening and there's maybe some kind of villain in the Shadow Isles who's been brewing some kind of plan to do something that we've heard about in the Senna and Lucian's, like the Ruined King game. Ahri, I'm calling it right now that Ahri and Yasuo are gonna be they're either gonna have a cameo or they're gonna be playable characters in the Ruined King game, which is weird, because the Ruined King game was initially pitched as Bilgewater versus the Shadow Isles, basically, like Bilgewater versus the Shadow Isles. But now, going by some lore updates to Braum, I think Braum might make an appearance there. Going by what Ahri and Yasuo are doing, Ahri and Yasuo might be appearing in the Ruined King game. And now I can't help but wonder who the fuck else is gonna be showing up. Like, because I thought it was just gonna be Bilgewater and Shadow Isles champions, but now, I guess, it feels to me like it's kind of open for a lot of guest characters from a lot of regions of Runeterra. Is Talia gonna show up? Like, are her and Yasuo gonna have a reunion thing? No, because she's busy with all the Asir, Empire, Serath stuff in Shurima, surely. I don't know, but I'm calling it, they're gonna be appearing in the Bilgewater, in the Ruined King game. That's just, I said that now, so now when it turns out to be true, I want people to acknowledge it and come to this video and say, hey, you were right, it's true. And if it doesn't turn out to be true, I want you to completely forget that I said anything, because then I never said it. I didn't say anything. You didn't hear that. I don't know anything about that. I didn't say anything. Anyway, I think that's it. I think it took another hour and 45 minutes-ish, but I think we're done. So if you've enjoyed this two-part breakdown of a 10-minute animated short where I got around to a lot of things, then I hope you watch part 1, because otherwise a lot of stuff I talked about here is probably going to have been weird. And I hope you enjoyed part 2 as well. And I hope Riot don't release too many more 10-minute animated shorts without giving me some warning at the very... Like, just email me. You can just tell me, like, hey, clear out your schedule for a couple of days. Something, please. Right, I'm supposed to self-promote. Like, comment, and subscribe. Those are the things that when you click the buttons on YouTube, YouTube notices that buttons have been clicked, and that means engagement, and that means our videos get shown to people. That's why YouTubers always ask you to do those things, is because views are nice, we like those, but the thing that actually matters to whether or not your video gets shown to other people is whether it entices people to click on buttons. So if you want to help me or other YouTubers that you follow out, clicking the buttons is actually kind of a more of a helpful thing than you think in terms of making that happen. Right, if you want to support me more directly than that, then I have a Patreon, I have a merchandise store, and I have a tip jar. If you want to, like, if you have $1 and you want to throw that at any of them, that's very helpful to me, because $1 in direct support is quite literally the same as thousands of ad-supported views. Like, if you send a YouTuber that you like $1, you're doing the same as if 1,000 people had decided to watch their videos. It's like a hugely outsized impact. So whether it's me or someone else, I try to encourage people to, generally speaking, support content that they enjoy directly with whatever they can, whenever they can, because genuinely it makes much more of a difference than you think. If you don't want to throw money at YouTubers right now because of, like, the way that the world is, believe me, I get it. I have a link to some charities down in the top of my description that could really use your help in these bizarre, fucked up 2020 times. As if you want to throw some money at that instead, I would completely be behind that and support you in doing that. Right, yeah. Last bit of self-promotion. I have a second channel. I play video games over there. It's more of a Let's Play thing. I try to do character analysis, animation analysis, and other stuff of that nature over there as well. So I'm playing through the Final Fantasy games from 6 to 9 so far. We're going to start in on 10 soon. I've got a playthrough of The World Ends With You going on over there. We're playing some Monster Hunter Iceborne and some Legends of Runeterra in between all of it. I need to do some more of that because they buffed Braum, and I really like playing decks with Braum in them. So you can like, comment, and subscribe over there as well, I guess, if you want to. And if not, honestly, don't worry about it. I know everything is really tiresome right now. Thank you very much for watching, and please remember to wear a mask and wash your hands.